Welcome to the Not Your Mother's Podcast, where we record all the time because we like to make podcasts on the internet. My name is Nick, and this is not my first time behind a microphone, believe it or not.
I'm Brandon, and I can confirm that he's just this amateurish.
You know, like when you go to handshake somebody and it fucks up, and like the awkward handshake, like it's a very popular thing on the internet.
Oh, this weekend
One sec.
Okay,
we just personified that
we did.
An intro.
Oh, absolutely. This weekend was the Easter celebrations.
Oh, yeah.
I went to my family, and I cannot tell you how many awkward handshakes. By the way, that's not noisy.
No, yeah, right? That's perfect.
I cannot tell you how many awkward handshakes I did with family. It was like one after another after another. I was just like, I want to kill myself after the introductions. I'm going to just go sit in the corner. I'm not going to talk to anyone. That's it.
That's fair.
Yeah.
For our Easter, we went to my father's. My mother moved out of the city last year.
Okay.
Who the hell wants to live in April when it's minus 19 out in the morning? Anyway, so we went there for dinner, and he was there with his girlfriend and his girlfriend's son and his girlfriend's daughter's boyfriend, because her daughter wasn't there because she's in China, and the daughter's boyfriend's mother was there, and then one of my dad's friends was there.
Can I get a fucking flowchart to follow this shit?
Well, I know, right? But they're all very religious.
Oh, Jesus
So a lot of the
Christ.
conversations revolved around that. And I'm not saying here nor there of religious versus not religious, but a really interesting conversation came up when my dad's like, "So Nick, do you miss church?" And I was like, "Nah, not really. Like, as atheists, these holidays are very different for us, right?" And he's like, "What do you mean?" I was like, "Well, the holiday for us isn't Easter. It's the day after Easter when we can go to Walmart and get like 3 literal tons of chocolate for about $3. He's like, "Oh yeah, I never thought of that." Same with Valentine's. It's the same with the other Halloween.
Christmas.
Christmas got Boxing Day and Boxing Week. Like that's the atheist holiday for me.
Oh, absolutely.
Atheists have the same holidays plus one day.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was kind of interesting.
I had somewhat of a similar experience. Near the end, when most of the family had left, I was one of the last people to leave my grandparents' house. Mansion. Yeah, and basically we were sitting there, and the conversation. It only when you get into small groups does the conversation get more like real. Otherwise, it's just pleasantries that no one gives a flying fuck about. And so the conversation.
What do you do for work?
Right. This conversation started to get more in depth. And my one aunt came up with just casually inserted thing about, "Oh yeah, my pastor did an April Fool's joke." I was like, "Sorry, you're what now?" I was like, "I've known you literally my entire life." That's the whole point of being an aunt.
And a good use of the word literal.
Yes, it is. I am a fucking communications major, damn it. And I will use it. And I was like, "You're what now?" I was like, "Sorry." So I'd known her my whole life. You have not been a religious person ever. I was just like, and then shortly after that, it took exactly 15 seconds for the conversation to go from religion to black people. And I do not want to tell you the transition, but I was like, I am checking out, sir.
Where are you from again, Brandon?
I am from picture like Alabama, but in Canada, and that's where I am.
All right. We don't need to paint with that palette. I'm just going to leave the brush on the table for all of the 1 or 2 listeners that are listening right now.
And of course, that palette is only filled with white paint.
Oh my God. It's a good thing we don't get paid for this.
Oh my God. You know the sponsors we'd have? We'd have like Breitbart and...
Probably Trump.
Yeah. That's why, Breitbart and Trump,
yeah. Awesome. So, we are... off topic, obviously. Well, not really. I mean, we're talking about horror, and you're talking about family during the holidays.
So, it goes hand in hand. Yeah.
So, this is the 3rd episode of our horror series for PC gaming, and just some of the topics we wanted to talk about. I thought about a 4th episode. That'd be great.
What's that?
I might coerce you into some VR.
Oh God, the last time we did VR, I damn near had a heart attack.
Because a lot of these conversations have been talking about horror as the medium, like video games as the medium, right?
Yeah.
And that is even changing because you've got. I talked a little bit about horror comics. We haven't really touched on it, but like horror in narrative, in books, like novelizations, like Bram Stoker's Dracula and Stephen King's It. Only two books that have legitimately scared me. Then you've got horror in films versus television. Like there's a difference there for the medium, right? And I think it's important to talk about horror in consoles and PCs versus VR. But that will be a conversation for a different day.
Oh, yeah.
Because today we're finishing our planned 3-part series. Why don't you start us off and talk about what we're going to be talking about today? Because once again, you've played the game and I have not. I've watched the entire game on YouTube.
Yeah. So we'll be talking about the Resident Evil. We'll be brushing on the. We'll be brushing over the series. But you
don't want to talk about all like 13 or 16 games?
Fuck no. God, you haven't 8 hours to record. I think we're gonna mainly focus on the first one and the 7th one.
Yeah.
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 So, yeah.
We're also going to toss in a few other ones that I.
It's kind of Resident Evil's kind of like the human centipede. You either want to be the first or the last. You do not want to be in the middle because it's just shit. And that works on so many levels.
And don't eat wasabi. So sorry, Kyle. So sorry, Kyle.
I think obviously the best place to start is the beginning. And you're the expert on the Resident Evil one.
No, my story's coming later. We're talking about number 7. Number 7 is relevant. Okay. And you just played it, right?
I mean, yeah, that's true.
Did you play it?
It's in the world of podcasts. Just played it could mean anything. Could mean 2 years ago. It could mean last night.
Welcome to the world of podcasts, where nobody wears pants and the conversations don't matter.
Yeah. Okay. I'll be the submissive here, and I'll go along with your suggestions. So let's start with 7 then, because who the fuck needs rules?
Yeah, and then we'll maybe switch to 3. And talk about 4, maybe then Parasite Eve.
Yeah.
And then we'll get to 1.
Never 5, though. Dear God, never 5.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Resident Evil 7. It's the first Resident Evil I've ever played. It's the only Resident Evil I should say.
It's a good entry to start on, honestly.
It scared the living fuck out of me. Easily the scariest game I've ever played. Asterisk, not in VR.
I was going to say,
games are a lot scarier.
But it's really funny you say that because PlayStation VR was launching at the same time, so they made Resident Evil 7 completely natively supported on the PlayStation VR.
Yes,
which I don't think I would last.
Oh my god, I saw the commercials for that, and this was right after I'd played the game. I saw commercials for the VR version of it. I was like, you could not pay me enough. You could pay me more to lose my anal virginity than you could to play that game in VR.
I was going to say, some women will eat hot food to induce labor. Some women will have sex to induce labor. If there was ever a need to induce a heart attack, I think it would be Resident Evil 7 in VR.
Absolutely it would be.
So let's dive right into it. What worked with 7? If we want to talk about the mechanics, and we were talking about the 3 layers of horror, which we'll just brush our course, because if you guys are listening to these podcasts in a row, which I know nobody is, it's okay, then it's going to be boring for you. But when talking about Stephen King's horror, we have horror, terror, and revulsion.
Yeah. Horror
being that in-your-face, dude with a knife is stabbing you or cutting off your fingers if you played Outlast. Terror is that feeling of something grander than you that's just immense and crazy. Like Cthulhu is a good example, the Lovecraft books and whatnot.
Yeah.
And then revulsion being mutilation, any kind of shock gore. When you're looking, Attack on Titan is a great anime about it. The Junji Ito books we were talking about, or any movie made by Rob Zombie.
That could not be more accurate.
So, with those three in mind, what worked in Resident Evil 7?
So Resident Evil 7, honestly, what kind of worked about it is it took almost like all three of those elements and just blended them together in this perfect like horror smoothie. What got you the most, I think, well, it got me the most, was definitely the horror, because it was the approaching a door and a fucking mutilated hillbilly kicks down the door and runs at you with a fucking weapon. Even that terrified the fuck out of me.
The intro to the game.
Yeah.
Like the intro there, I want to say cinematics, but it's all like in-game movie, right?
It is, yeah.
But there are going to be spoilers in this podcast, so get over it.
Get off my dick, get on my level, and get over it.
Throwback to like 2015. Yeah, we need to adopt that state of mind. Yeah. The spoilers, get over it. We don't give a fuck.
Oh, exactly.
If you're not wanting to listen, then you won't. So anyway, in the intro, you have your like girlfriend that's like, oh no, I'm trapped, and you're like, oh, we'll save you, and you go to this creepy ass mansion. Then you find her, and she's got this dual personality bullshit going on.
Oh fuck!
And then she's chasing you around and like cuts your hand off. That's some good fucking horror.
Oh yeah, that's another thing that I'm a huge fan of. I won't say I don't like it, but I prefer it less when games like nudge you into, like slowly lull you into the horror. This one just fucking free falls you into a huge tub of horror right away.
Yeah. I'd even argue that they started off with a bit of terror because you're trying to find her, right? You get to the middle of the bayou. I forget where it takes place.
I don't remember.
Yeah, but you get to the middle of it, and like you're going through all this vegetation and the house, because the house is kind of the main character almost of the game. If we're talking about horror, and the way that they're showing the house, it looks run down and overgrown and creepy as fuck, and it's. The terror then is going, I don't want to go in there, but I know I have to go in there, and like, what the hell could be inside? Something like that. What the hell was this chick doing here that she's inside somewhere like that? And like, I feel like the terror really played out that way.
Oh, definitely. But a point that you touched on earlier, though, is that...
I like touching points.
Nothing like touching some points. Was the cinematics of it, because as you know, and I will immediately alienate all the indie game players right now.
He's a communications major. That's a real word. Alienate. Go on.
It's spelled with 6 N's. Is that I can't get immersed in a game if it doesn't have good graphics. I just can't.
Oh, that's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this game has some of the best graphics, obviously because it's a newer game. Some of the best graphics out there right now.
It's because they had a
phenomenal.
Budget. Yeah. Yeah. No, just wonderful. I mean, yeah. Sorry. Small aside. I feel like the reason they had good graphics is because their big competitor, Silent Hill, came out with PT.
Yeah.
And before they announced that PT was canceled, they were already developing 7, and they were like, oh, shit. Anyway, go on.
Yes, so that was a big help on the horror element to the game. Because if you're playing like, go back to like Resident Evil 1 here quickly, and like you're shooting the zombies, you play that now, you're not even scared a little bit.
One antithesis was a small indie game I played, and by indie I mean this guy was in like DigiPen. It's like it's a university in the States for game design.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And for a project, he made this horror game called The Devil's Tuning Fork, and it was really interesting because it was scary as fuck, but the graphics were wireframe, and the whole thing was the screen was black, and you couldn't see where you were going. Your character was blind. Okay. But you had this kind of sonar, so you could hit this tuning fork, and it would send the sound waves out to show you where the walls and everything were, and where the enemies were. But the enemies could hear you if you hit the tuning fork and if you were walking around.
Crazy.
So it was this weird balancing act of, do you want to see, or do you not want to get chased?
That's really cool, though, because that almost took it to, okay, I don't have the budget or the time to make AAA graphics. Yeah. So I'm going to almost go the exact opposite and do very minimal graphics at all.
But you're right. I think that the graphic element really helped out with the horror, especially when you're a AAA studio. You have that option.
Yeah.
Until Dawn is another good example of that, where they wanted to make it like a '90s slasher, so they did the graphics up really, really well for the time, and made it that way, which really helped with the horror, because horror of having that evil in your face. I mean, it works in Amnesia because that's what graphics were at the time. Now we're getting kind of past that. We have like VR and that kind of thing, and there's so much in the horror genre that I'm finding that you do need that realism to really hit home the horror aspect, right?
Yeah, definitely. And another thing that really worked with this game was something that I talked about in the Evil Within series, which was with the Evil Within. Sorry, this isn't something that worked with the game. It's something I wish they'd done. That would have made it work better.
Yeah.
The Evil Within series made it so if you cleared a room and then went to another room and then came back a few minutes later, that room, in most cases, was no longer clear. Like, there were enemies there again. So you were almost never safe. There was no backtracking where you could just sit in a room and wait it out. That almost never was an option. Whereas in Resident Evil, that was very much a thing. You could just clear out a room, and then, with a few exceptions, that room was always going to be safe from now on. Yeah.
So that, I will say, is a throwback. That's something that they've had in the series that worked in the first and second one, but never really after that. In that the whole idea was ammunition was scarce in the first one, because you had like enough ammo in the mansion itself to kill, say, 60 zombies. But in the mansion itself, there were 100 zombies. And so they kind of push it to the point of, can I get past this guy, or is it worth it to like put him down?
Oh, okay.
And so because you were making more impactful choices that way, they couldn't really have things respawning and stuff because it was too much action.
Gotcha.
Which I don't think it really has a place in this. I think I would agree it's probably better done with the Evil Within, where nothing is safe.
Yeah.
And you can't make safe spots because you can't go and be like, oh, I cleared that room, so at least I can hide here.
Yeah, exactly.
The two things that I want to talk about that I feel worked in 7, first off, the bosses were fucking awesome.
Shit, man. Those scared me so much.
Resident Evil is known for having really good boss fights, and they've done it really well throughout the series. But in 7, they were scary.
Yeah.
They also had terror, and they had revulsion, all kind of mixed into these balls with these bosses. Like the mother, who was like the Lord of Insects.
Oh my god, her, because if I remember correctly, she had this laugh that she would do every now and then.
Yeah.
All you would do was hear that, and I would start like shaking. I'd be like, holy fuck, where is she? Yeah.
And then the very first boss, you find the cop, and it's like, yeah, I'm here to help, don't worry. And then he dies.
Yes.
And then you find the dad, and you're like, oh shit, just in the barn. And then it gets lit on fire or something. He's in the car, and you get him out of the car, and then you hit him with the car. And you're like, whoo, beat that boss fight. And then he gets up and you're like, who the fuck are these people?
Right? He will not fucking die in the series. And it drove me nuts how many times you have to kill him.
But it was a really good point of terror that first time, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And you're like, oh, I beat the boss fight.
And then then a few levels later, he'll just show up again and mutated as fuck. And you'll be like, oh, Jesus Christ, I thought you were dead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And let's talk about revulsion. I'm noticing with games that use revulsion well, you don't see many points of it. I already mentioned Outlast.
Yeah.
When, again, there are spoilers in this podcast. Get over it. In Outlast, you get captured by one of the dudes, and he cuts off a bunch of your fingers, and it's... I've got a video on YouTube where I got like fucking nauseous watching that. In Resident Evil 7, I think one of the most memorable scenes for me is when you're captured by the family and you come to and you're tied to a chair at the dinner table. And they'd finished preparing their Sunday meal, and it was a bunch of like mutilated pieces of human.
Yeah.
But they were like old and rotting, and then the mother was trying to force feed you these intestines and bleh.
It was bad.
But it was good revulsion, right? It was turning your stomach while you were still like pumped with adrenaline.
Oh yeah.
So I felt like that worked.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I appreciate it. I actually expected. The revulsion actually seemed a little tame for me. Like, not that it didn't get me, it did, but I actually almost like, based on the kind of game it was, I actually expected more revulsion.
Yeah, that's a thing with. I was going to say with your generation, but I mean that's the thing as time goes on, because it was bad for my generation too, because we had Saving Private Ryan that came out,
Yeah.
and all the kids were like, "Oh, he lost his arm. That's so funny," because you get desensitized to it.
Yeah.
That's the horror you never lose, because it's in your brain. It's imprinted in your brain of how your fear receptors work. That we are more scared of a dude with a knife chasing us down a hallway than we are of heart disease. And let's be honest, which one kills more people in a year?
Yeah, no, that's fair.
And terror, the same kind of thing. We are always scared of things that are different. I was just watching a shitload of videos about like us building AI in the world, and there's this one robot called Sophia, which some of it is like pre-coded, some of it is actual AI learning script. But you should check it out. It's kind of crazy.
Okay.
But most of the people are fucking scared of it.
Yeah.
And at one point, she joked about wanting to take over the world, and like she got more bad press than PewDiePie.
Oh Jesus.
Yeah, it was nuts. But anyway, moving back to the conversation, what didn't work in Resident Evil?
All right, so we talked about the presence of safe zones.
Yeah.
That didn't really work for me.
Yeah.
Although I will say it did and it didn't. It didn't in the gamer aspect of me didn't like that. Like, I wanted there not to be safe zones. But the actual player, I fucking loved that there were safe zones, because they gave me a place to lower my heart rate for a few seconds.
One thing that I also found interesting that I didn't think that would have worked that did, to go back to that last conversation, was the save points. So I was like, guys, are you serious? Like, this is your fucking 20th game in the series, and you've got the old like typewriter save points that you had in the first game. And then I started watching people play it, and I was like, oh.
Yeah.
Because if you got past a difficult part, you could save it. If you could save it anywhere, then like that horror's gone. There's no more, like, goosebumps gone.
Yeah.
Sweat's gone. If it's like, I got past a really hard part, but I know I have to get through this other hard room to get to the save point, it kicks it up a notch. And
oh, it does.
That worked.
When I was playing that game and I came across a save point, I made a point of memorizing exactly on the map where this save point was, in case I got past the really hard part, and then I had to sprint back to that room really quickly to save, because I was not doing that again. Yeah.
What didn't work for me is the Akira effect.
Okay.
So we talked about the Akira effect last time when we were talking about the evil within, and it's something I find that's more in Eastern culture. And if you've ever seen the movie Akira, it's this really cool story about this biker gang set in the future. This dude gets psychic abilities, and then at the end of the last 10 minutes, it takes this weird 180. And that weird 180 I found has permeated anime and a lot of Eastern culture throughout the years. And it happened again with this one. Because the beginning of the game, the best part of the remake of the Dawn of the Dead movie was the lack of explanation as to why zombies are on the earth. They give you this half-assed one-liner that makes no sense about how there's no more room in hell. And you're like, okay, cool, but that doesn't explain why this dude died and got up and is trying to eat me.
Yeah.
And Resident Evil, I wish sometimes that they just wouldn't explain it. Like, if you could just make the first 3/4 of a Resident Evil game and fucking stop, I think it would be way better. Because that whole bullshit with the boat, and then the weird, like, super mama evil chick, and the choice at the end, like, I didn't need any of that.
Yeah.
That's it just dwindled for me.
I kind of got that feeling too. It kind of felt like it was almost like its own mini game at that point. After you left the house, it felt like it was its own like separate mini game that you were playing. Like, it wasn't really related to the first one. Yeah. It just didn't feel the same.
And that has been a theme in every fucking Resident Evil game too. So one thing that I want to talk about. What are we at? Oh yeah, we got time. With Resident Evil 7, I always find it interesting because there'll always be 5 to 10 years between good Resident Evil games.
Yeah.
And they'll make a really good one, and then they'll pump out a bunch of shitty ones like Resident Evil Revelations. Oh my god. And then, boom, we get a really good one that redefines the genre.
Yeah.
And I find it interesting because I would argue that this one is going to redefine a lot of ways that horror is seen.
Even I think so, yeah.
If you look at like The Evil Within 2, I think there was a lot of influence from Resident Evil.
Okay, yeah, I can see that.
That being said, if you've ever played PT on the PlayStation, which is impossible to get on the PlayStation Store now, so
can't get it anymore. If you have it, you're a lucky duck.
Yeah, but it was a demo for the next Silent Hill game called Silent Hills that has since been. It'll never happen. But there are so many parallels between that and Resident Evil 7 that I feel like the studio saw that and they were like, that'd fucking work. And then they just kind of made their game with that in mind.
Yeah.
But because of that, it's one of the games that's going to redefine the genre. And if we look going back, that can be the same said about a few different Resident Evil games. Let's ignore everything that came out after 4. Because, ugh. And I know a lot of people are going to argue with me with that, but fuck off. You're all Five Nights at Freddy's fans. We know it. Fuck you, FNAF.
That or Alien Covenant fans. No, not Covenant.
Excuse me?
No, not Isolation. Which one was the shitty one?
Oh, Colonial Marines.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's one of the only games I own that I've never beaten because I just can't force myself to do that.
It's the only Aliens game I've never beaten for the same reason.
Yeah.
Oh God, we're not.
We don't have time to get into that. Sorry.
Yeah. But 4, when Resident Evil 4 came out, it had been a long time. We had Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3, and they were like their own little thing. And then Parasite Eve came out on the Dreamcast. Little known fact, because most people know it on PlayStation, which came out like 3 years later. But they were all like. Sorry, I'm going to back up here. When you look at long-standing horror series, something happens because we talked about this with horror, that if it's not realistic graphics enough, it kind of dies off. And I think that happens no matter what.
Yeah.
Like we talked about the amount of jump scares in games and how Evil Within, how the second one did that really well with that chick that you had no idea what she was, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she came in very seldom, etc., etc. But eventually that shit's going to wear off and it's hard to keep it up.
Yeah.
So, as an example, first Dead Space game, one of the best horrors I've ever played. Second Dead Space game, I hear it's very good. Third Dead Space game, they decided to go straight to an action game. Like, the horror is completely gone out of it.
Okay, yeah.
First Resident Evil game, a genre-defining horror game. Second Resident Evil game, huge critical acclaim. It was actually really good, and it was a mix between horror and action.
Mm-hmm.
Third Resident Evil game tried to do the same thing and completely failed on the horror, so it's known as an action.
Okay.
And so I feel like then they gave it 5 or 6 years or something like that. And when 4 came out, it was on the GameCube. GameCube had just launched, and I remember the opening. We're going to go backwards in time here because these are these Resident Evil moments, and like I got it watching 7 on YouTube of with like that scene when you had to eat the guts, and it was like, oh, there's that Resident Evil, like, oh, making me feel things I don't want.
Yeah.
In Resident Evil 4, a few things that they did really well is it was all set in this like Eastern European country.
Okay.
But the main character was American, so you didn't know anything about the culture, you didn't know the language, and it was very run down. It looked almost medieval. But you get to this isolated, deserted town where you're trying to save the president's daughter. We won't get into that. That's part of the Akira effect. And it was awesome because you get in there and it had this forced camera angle. Every Resident Evil game before this had these like early days of video games.
Yeah. But
the camera angles was when you got into a room, it was like the camera was set up in the way of cinematography, and you couldn't move the camera, and you just had to move around the room that way.
Yeah.
Terrible. Hated it. Worst thing that ever came out of Resident Evil.
Did.
Yeah. In 4, the camera was fixed behind your right shoulder, and there was nothing you could do about it. And so you had a little bit of peripheral, but it suddenly, the field of view became part of the horror, right?
Yeah.
You couldn't see things behind you, etc., that kind of stuff. And so that was new. And you had to shoot and do everything that you had to do with that camera view. You get into this deserted town, and I mean, you're like a special forces of stars or whatever the fuck they call themselves. So you got your like pistol and everything, and you've got this really cool red dot, and it's like, oh, neat, a new age of gaming. And then you're exploring this deserted town, and for no reason, the church bell starts tolling. And I don't think you've ever played 4, right?
No.
Because what ensues next is 45 minutes of sheer fucking adrenaline-fueled horror as the entire town, like, comes at you as one relentless horde. And, like, you're busting into some of the houses, boarding up the doors, boarding up the windows. Jesus. But there's only one of you, and there's a mob of them, so they can break the windows down faster than you can board them up. So then you force yourself upstairs because there's only one way to get in. Then some of them start, like, climbing the building and getting in the other windows. So you start boarding those up. And this isn't in-game cinematics. This is you in an open world doing what you can.
Holy
and then, like, you get onto the fucking rooftops and you start taking them out, and you finally got a handle on it. And then from behind you, this dude with a chainsaw cuts you in half, and you have to start it all over.
Oh my god.
But knowing that it's coming doesn't make it any better, because it's so frantic. And that's how they started the game, which gave it this air of, like, just pure, sheer fucking horror.
Yeah.
And it never really let off. But they used the action as part of the horror. And that kind of redefined horrors. If you look at the GameCube era of types of horror games that came out, they're very similar to that.
Yeah. Great points. And just because we're getting close to the end of time here.
Oh, we're already over.
We are, but we'll make it work.
Sorry.
Just to get, because you're the one with the knowledge of the Resident Evil games more than I do.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to get your thoughts on comparing, because let's just objectively agree that 1, 4, and 7 are the 3 best Resident Evil games. Is that correct?
Goddamn right.
Okay.
I mean, 2 and 3 are up there, but yeah, we'll go 1, 4, 7.
Okay.
For their impact on the gaming world.
Yes, exactly. That's what I want. It's not going to be an apples to apples. It's going to be an apples to oranges comparison, kind of, because it's hard to compare games in different decades, even really. It's hard to compare games in different decades right to each other because it's not the same thing.
Yeah.
But in your opinion, between 1, 4, and 7, which was the best game in its time?
Ooh. 7 is going to fall far behind on that, simply because it's an amazing game, but the world of gaming is so saturated now that, like, you've got 5 or 6 major titles coming out every month.
Yeah, that's fair.
Resident Evil 1, you're talking about a major title coming out every 2 or 3 years. Yeah. And so it was huge because there wasn't much else.
Yeah.
4, again, I'd have to say 1. 1 had the most impact because that's what was available. That being said, out of those 3, I think 4 was probably my favorite, simply based on the evidence that it was the only one that compelled me enough to finish.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah, because the first one was fucking scary, and I've got more stories about the first one, but I've tried playing it a few times. It came out in 1996, so I would have been 12 when we first played it, and that's a story for another day. But anyway, haven't beaten it. I know it. I know the whole story. I know the whole story of 1, 2, and 3. Yeah. But 4 is the only one that compelled me to beat it.
Interesting. All right. Well, with that, I think we're gonna close this out. Again, as we end every show, I will say I do recommend you play Resident Evil 7 if you haven't played it already. Phenomenal game. If you enjoy horror games, if you're one of those guys that prefers action with like a little bit of jump scares, don't play this game. It'll scare you far too much.
Yeah.
Yes, it's not for the faint of heart.
But if you're curious to see what the next 3 to 5 years of horror games are going to look like, pick up Resident Evil 7.
Yeah.
I can confidently say that.
And until then, Nick, do your signature outro line.
Oh yeah, I had one of those. Just kidding. Let's go play some fucking games.